Hey everyone and welcome to the channel. So here we have it, the new Team Associated TC8. It's their first new touring car in 7 years. It's my first new touring car in 12 years. Let's not waste any time. Let's get straight to the build. First thing to take note of is the manual. Now, quite often with Team Associated cars, there can be out-of-date sections in the actual printed manual. We have two options. One is to go online and check the latest online manual, but often that isn't necessarily up to date. And one of the regular things that you need to just check is the setup sheet at the back of the manual. And it tends to be the case that the setup sheet at the back for the kit setup is the one that matches the parts that are in the kit rather than the instructions in the manual. And that's the case as well with the TC8. It says there's 3x6mm screws and 1mm spacers for the front. Actually, you'll find in practice that the spacers are all 2mm and the screws are all 8mm. So just be aware of that. It isn't a mistake in the packing of the kit. It's a mistake in the way that the manual's been put together. It is a nice manual, nice and glossy, nice and substantial. And one thing to mention as well is that there is plenty of tuning tips in the back of the manual for those of us that maybe aren't quite so experienced and need a little extra support in understanding what to change when with our touring car. A quick word on the suspension arms. Now you'll see that pretty much every modern touring car uses a version of this style of arm, i.e. a long arm with pivot ball mountings on the inside and also on the outside, which is in contrast to the older style of A-arm with a hinge pin and with a C-hub on the outside. Associated have gone for a moulded arm, which maybe doesn't look quite as fancy in the pits as some of the other manufacturers who've chosen carbon fibre and aluminium, but I'm in favour of this. This is mechanical simplicity and should be a lot more robust and hopefully a lot easier to adjust as well. When you're trimming the arm ball inserts from the sprue, just make sure you get right in close to where the moulding meets there. It's hidden on the edge of it there, so that you have a nice clean edge all the way around the insert. That'll make it go in a bit easier. And also when getting these in, they're a little bit fiddly, but I found if you take them and if you put them in at a angle so that the slot is half going into the hole, it will kind of push in one go, and that's a bit easier than trying to compress it. Needs a little bit of finessing just to make sure it's fully inserted in the arm. It'll kind of pop into place when it is. Associated have included a feature that's called active shock towers in the car, which means that this black piece here, which is the actual shock tower, it's very low profile. The front one has slightly more angle than the rear. This is the front bulkhead. Same bulkhead, by the way, all the way around the car, so 4 pieces are the same. There is a pin that holds the bottom of the shock tower in place. There'll be a grub screw that goes in there to secure the pin. It means that you can then have a shock tower that drops down quickly when the suspension is in extension, in theory meaning faster rebound in the suspension. The kit setting though calls for the active shock tower to be held in place. That's held in place by a small screw that goes through here, and that's the way that I'll be building it. I always build my cars to kit settings to start off with and work from there. The instructions also call for thread lock on a lot of these parts. My preference is not to use it on the first build. Sometimes, especially with small grub screws, you can find that the thread lock will lock it in permanently and it becomes a pain to disassemble. I prefer to just have a shakedown run and see which parts are coming loose and then thread lock as appropriate. This is the spur gear hub, and Associated do warn you that the bearings are going to be a press fit in it. By the way, with these Associated bearings, they have a blue rubber seal on one side and a standard metal shield on the other. You generally build them with the blue seal facing out for a bit more weather protection. Anyway, moving on to the spur gear hub again, they do warn you that it's a tight fit on the bearings. This one here in the back of the hub is not too bad to put in because you can just push it down on a flat surface like your workbench and push the bearing in. On this side where the bearing is actually recessed, it's a bit more difficult. So what I found is that if you actually put a nice stack of the 5mm shims that they provide for tuning the free play on the spur gear anyway, if you put a full stack on there, that's about 5 of them, and then place the spur gear hub over, and then take your screw and screw it in place, that should be enough to squeeze the bearing into place as a push fit. I'd probably suggest doing it with no shims first of all, just to get the most movement, and then just to finish it off, put those shims on there and squeeze that bearing into place. Both the diff case and the spool on the TC8 need to have this extra flange glued on for the other side of the belt pulley, which is quite unusual these days. Normally these are all one piece when you get them in kits. It looks a little bit fiddly. Now there is one of these notches that is ever so slightly wider. There's about 10 notches when you go all the way around, and one of them is ever so slightly wider, which hopefully you can just about make out is this one here. And also on the flange, it is two-sided. There's one side where the little tab is flush, and the other side where the tab is away from the edge. Now the flush side is the one that should be facing outwards, because you can tell from the position of the notch that it needs to have the flange moved inwards a little bit so that it's flush against the side of the pulley. And once we've got this on, we'll add a little drop of super glue. I've got some thin super glue to hand just to hold it in place, not too much, because the last thing we want is to get some glue all over the pulley itself. Okay, so that's just about clipped into place. As you can see, no gap there along the edge of the diff pulley, so just a couple of very small drops of super glue should be enough to hold that in place. Because the TC8 has a mid motor like most modern touring cars, it also runs equal length front belts. They're both 351 teeth. Funnily enough, another car that ran equal length front and rear belts was the Tamiya TA05, and I first had one of those around about 20 years ago. Anyway, next step is to install the gear diff in the rear and the spool in the front. There's quite a lot of symmetry on the TC8, and that's also true of the hubs for the suspension. The same steering hubs are used front and rear. Obviously on the rear they don't do any steering, they're just used to adjust the toe in. Associated provide 3 different kinds of hub. There is a different axle height for each one: 0, +1 and +2. +1 is the standard build. Effectively this is a roll center adjustment. Also, these hubs allow the adjustment of KPI, kingpin inclination. That's something we saw introduced on the B7 1/10 scale electric buggy, and it allows you to offset the pivot point of the upper position of the steering hub and angle the kingpin to give slightly different handling characteristics. Caster is adjusted on the TC8 by changing the whole upper arm. You get 3 different alternatives in the box: 0, 2 and 4 degrees. The kit settings calls for a 4-degree caster upper arm on the front and 0 degrees on the rear. In fact, there's no such thing as rear caster, but it can be used as a wheelbase adjustment. And the way that they will set camber on the moulded front arm is with a combination of a ball cup and a turnbuckle, with the ball cup supported within the end of the moulded arm. Steering on the TC8 is with a single bell crank system compared to the twin bell crank that was used on the previous generation of cars. This mounts directly to the floating servo mount like that and is supported by bearings. Another of the developments with the latest generation of touring cars is the move to extremely short shocks. It's hard to get a sense of perspective on this, but I mean, this is less than the width of my thumb in length, and it goes with an incredibly short shock shaft as well, and even the shock caps only a few threads deep, much lower profile than what we're used to with the previous generation of touring cars. Associated are also keeping up to date with the latest trends by supplying a 3D printed front bumper instead of the more traditional foam. I'll be interested to see how well this one holds up. Also with one of my least favourite inventions of recent years, the horizontal rear body post that sticks out to the rear, which I find can be a complete nuisance when you're trying to put your body on. Associated supply 2 spur gears with the TC8, this larger one for modified racing and this smaller one suitable for stock racing. These gears are 64 dp. Now when I race, I always use 48 dp, so I'll be fitting one of my own spur gears. For electrics, I'm going to reuse some older equipment that I've got. A Hobbywing XR10 stock spec speed controller, a Surpass V5R 17.5 turn motor, the Futaba 404 SBS-E receiver, and a Futaba S9550 steering servo, as well as a 6000 mAh Intellect LiPo stick pack. We'll see how this stuff goes to start off with. If anything needs upgrading, we'll do that as and when required. A nice design feature is this small channel under the motor mount that allows you to route the wire from your speed controller through in front of the motor for a nice clean installation. Body shell for this one is going to be the Montec Giulia, mainly because I can pretend that it's an Alfa Romeo using the included sticker sheet. Also an opportunity to try out some different paint after years of problems with the recent batches of Tamiya white polycarbonate sprays. We'll try this out with the Core RC range. So after lots and lots of final tweaks, this one is ready to hit the track. We'll just pop the body on to get a quick look at the corner weights. And we'll zoom in a bit closer to the corner weight readouts just to see how the TC8 looks. As you can see, it's extremely light. Even with the 2 included additional 10-gram weights, it's still 1260 grams total. That's 60 grams below the limit for my local racing. So I'm going to need to find some extra ballast before I enter a proper race. But also very well balanced front to rear, almost perfect front to rear weight distribution, and good on the corner weights as well. Next stop, the track. So what's my verdict on the Associated TC8? Let's start off with the build. When I first saw the promotional photos, I was a bit concerned. I thought there'd be quite a lot of plastic and that this would be rather a overweight car out of the box. That really isn't the case at all. These parts are much more refined than you would expect, and the overall building experience was very good. And as I've mentioned already, the car itself is actually extremely lightweight and will need a lot of ballast to be ready to race. The build itself is very straightforward, although bear in mind that there's quite a lot of assemblies that are shared in different locations, but with very small differences, so do pay attention to which parts you're using and the way that you're using them. The main part that was a bit of a concern is the spur gear hub, and that requires the bearings to be pressed into place, and especially the smaller bearing on the inside feels like too much of a press fit, and it may well have been damaged during the course of that assembly. Fortunately, on the track, it doesn't seem to have affected the car's performance, but I'm not sure how long that bearing will actually last before failing. Other than that, the only negative I had in the build was that for some reason the 2 screws to hold the motor in were missing, but they're quite easy to find in the spares box. And a couple of other small observations. One is that the mount for the steering servo, which is held in place by 2 screws that are not very widely spaced, take some time to make sure that that is properly aligned in the chassis, and you'll be able to tell that because the steering lock will be even from both sides. The other thing that is a small concern, although it probably is intended in terms of performance, is that the front bulkhead with the high flex top deck and no additional bracing does move around quite a lot. And although this may be intended to create more front end grip, I would like to see it held a bit more securely. Now let's move on to talking about performance. Now, disclaimer time, this was the first time I'd driven a car on a tarmac track for at least 3 years. It's about the first time that I've driven a four-wheel drive touring car on a tarmac track for probably very nearly 10 years, and the first time I'd ever used this particular tyre. So the first impression that I had when I put the car on the track was quite negative, if I'm honest with you. There wasn't a great deal of grip and there was far too much steering. But as the day went on, I made a few changes. I changed my tyre prep routine, which worked a lot better. I made some adjustments to the rear toe settings, decreasing the length of this link in order to increase the amount of rear toe, and also using some spacers to remove the dynamic toe change on the rear, so now it moves more linearly. These both improved the consistency of the rear grip. I also rotated these springs around, so instead of the kit setting of having the grey spring on the front and the blue spring on the rear, I ran the grey spring on the rear and the blue spring on the front. Again, this smoothed out the steering. And the final change I made, which I wasn't really expecting to work, was to actually mount the front shocks in the middle hole on the wishbone instead of the kit standard inner hole. And that again took a little bit more steering out of the car. Maybe it was a little bit too understeery overall, but still the balance was pretty good and the car was very drivable. On top of that, the Montec Julia body seemed to work quite well, and best of all, the core RC paint didn't fall off in lumps like the Tamiya paint has been recently. So overall, a very positive debut for the Associated TC8, with plenty of potential for improvement over the coming outdoor and then indoor season. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you've got any questions or comments, then please do leave them below. If you've enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you click on the like button. And if you enjoy what we're doing on the channel, then please do consider subscribing. As ever, thank you very much for watching.